And I do believe very strongly in that old adage that perfection is an illusion. We always have to have continuous improvement in mind. And so your high performers, when they come to you and they say, can you give me feedback on this? They are genuinely seeking feedback. They're not seeking reaffirmation that, nope, it was great. They're genuinely seeking feedback, and they'll have a better relationship with their leaders and mentors who are willing to give them that feedback.
Welcome to Culture Change RX, the podcast for healthcare professionals that are committed to creating a thriving workplace culture, improving the experiences of employees and patients, and ultimately unlocking their organization's next level of potential. I'm Sue Tetzlaff, your host and co-founder of Capstone Leadership Solutions. Join me and my insightful guests each week as we share actionable insights for navigating the crucial people side of the business of healthcare. Subscribe now for a weekly dose of Culture Change RX. Now let's dive into this week's conversation where culture change takes center stage. Welcome to another episode of Culture Change RX. And I love these episodes when we have one of our transformational coaches in the studio. And today it is Courtney back with us again. Thank you for being here. And I'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself a little bit more for those that don't know you yet. But before we do that, I want to tee up the topic, and then we'll tee up your introduction and we'll get right into it. So for our listeners that heard last week, our episode was a Culture Bite episode, which was the smaller solo episodes. And it was an episode where I was able to provide some tips, some real actionable, doable, practical, tested tips that can help leaders or even humans, just in any situation, be able to give more impactful, caring feedback. And we decided that, Courtney and I today are going to take that to a whole new level. We know from our own work as healthcare leaders and as coaches to healthcare leaders that we can't train enough, coach enough, provide enough guidance on this tactic of feedback. So that is our topic again this week, and we're going to dive into that. But I also want to start with a quote, and I'll probably do it, injustice here because I don't have it right in front of me to read word for word, but it's a quote about feedback and the fact that it really strikes a chord between this tension that we have as humans, that one, we want to be accepted the way we are, and two, we want to continue and grow and develop. So when we're in that situation of receiving feedback, we have this thing going on is, can't you just accept me the way I am? And then also this thing of bring it to me because I want to grow and develop. So we're going to talk more about that today and how to overcome maybe that tension and lean into that tension to really have good feedback relationships. So with that introduction and connection to the last episode, I'll turn it over to you, Courtney, to do a nice introduction of yourself so people can understand where you've been and what you're up to.
I'm so excited to be back on another podcast with you with such a fitting topic, and that quote was absolutely perfect to kick us off. I'm Courtney Kloehn. I am a transformational expert with Capstone Leadership Solutions for about the last 18 months, but my history with Capstone did not start there. I have been in rural healthcare for the last 20 years. I worked at a critical access hospital. I was their vice president of professional services and compliance officer. And over a decade ago, we partnered with Capstone Leadership Solutions for our improvement journey. And I had the privilege of sitting on our steering team from the start of that journey, just to watch it grow and develop, fell in love with all of this work. And I'm really fortunate to be able to be here with you today as a transformational expert and speak on this work that I have really seen come to life operationally, and to coach on this work because that's really where my passion lies.
We love that about our coaching team. And that's what our partners and our clients love about our coaching team is they don't just know this stuff. They have lived this stuff and they've seen the impact firsthand of what this work can do in workplaces. So with that, I'm just wondering where to start on this very big and important topic of feedback. When we were talking about the last episode and the 6 tips, I know that, one of the things that we started to talk about was the fact that feedback gets pretty hard when, or just different, I guess, maybe not hard, but different when we're coaching and mentoring, especially people that are very high performing already. And I think maybe that's just a jumping off point for you to share some of your thoughts and ideas and maybe some examples that our audience might really resonate with and benefit from related to that situation of giving feedback.
You bet. And so, as leaders, it really is our duty and our responsibility to coach and to mentor all of our team members. And so, the last podcast really did a great job speaking to those 6 tips for giving feedback. But I wanted to dive in deeper into one of those areas that we can tend to get tripped up in as leaders, which is giving feedback to our highest performers, to our rock stars on our team, because we can make the unfair assumption that they're already operating at the top of their game. What can I offer to them to get even better? But your high performers, they're craving it. I always say that I'm a lifelong learner. And so the best experiences I have had with leaders and mentors has been when they're like, hey, if you make this small tweak, you'll elevate it just that much more. And so really today's podcast is talking about that, how to apply that concept for your high performers. And so a great example is I'm going to share with you back when we first started our journey. Public speaking was not always the preference of our leaders to talk in front of their peers. That can be very scary. And so I would coach my fellow peer leaders to get up and share a topic with their group at a leadership training. And afterwards, they would always come to me and say, hey, how did I do? And this is where I have some tips and tricks for you. And so feedback ties very closely to trust. And so they're trusting me to give them authentic feedback. They are putting themselves out there. They're excited. Their adrenaline's running high, and they're trusting me to give them authentic feedback. And so there's a couple of things you want to do here. First, you do want to look for what was really great and what they just did, because that's what you want to share in the moment. And second, you want to pay attention to timing. Think of those tips you learned last week. So you want to compliment in public, but coach in private. You want to give those opportunities for improvement in private. So they always knew I was going to tell them what they rocked coming right off that stage, because they're asking me and I want to be genuine and I want to be responsive. But I'm not going to be unauthentic and say it was all perfect if there were opportunities for growth. And so I share with them what went really well. And then the next day they would know I'd come and find them and say, hey, I've got some suggestions for the next time you present, or some suggestions that would take it from good to great. Do you have a moment? And there's that opportunity to ask to be invited to give feedback. And that's how you help them grow. One, it's about being authentic in what you're sharing with them. We're nice people in healthcare. We really are. And so we want to be nice, but it's unkind to be unauthentic. And so share with them what went really well. And then 2, pick the right timing to circle back and say, hey, can I give you some feedback that I think would take it from good to great to even greater? So that's really what I recommend for giving that type of feedback. Timing is everything, because again, Sue, you mentioned it in that quote. We want to grow, but we want to be accepted for who we are as human beings. And so you're really playing around with that timing component, and then making sure that everything you share is authentic. Because if I said to that leader, it was perfect, everything was flawless, you did great, and then all of a sudden the next day she was hearing from her other colleagues that, hey, the presentation was clunky, or I wasn't able to connect to this, she might wonder if I was being honest with her. And that's where the trust starts to break down. So that's really how I approach kind of your high performers in terms of giving feedback in that type of situation.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see, just some key words and phrases that can be really helpful in those situations. And once we start to be known to act and behave in that way in how we mentor, coach, give feedback to people is they'll come to know and expect it, which it does build that trust, right? So they know they're going to get that praise, that positive in that high moment. And then they know we're going to circle back. And so once it gets going, they're going to know that that's how it rolls with you, and they'll trust that. But in the beginning, keywords often help with that too, such as, right now in this moment, I want to tell you these 3 great things about what I just saw. And, let's both think about it. Let's reflect on it. Let's talk about, we want each one to be better than anyone before. And let's have that conversation tomorrow or Monday or something. And so when we start to really use those keywords and explain our approach and commit to that approach, then we build trust as well. And we open that door, like they said, yes, I want that from you. And you invite it and they say yes to it. So yeah, that really is authentic. That is caring. And it does build trust. I mean, my goodness, that builds trust.
Absolutely. Well, and even in smaller things. So I always think of, I had a CEO who in the beginning, you don't expect it. So he was very grammar, spelling focused. And I carry so much appreciation for him today, because you would send him a communication, he'd reply, and he'd share with you some opportunities for improving that communication. And he did that because he cared. And so in the
Oh,
moment,
yeah.
like, I just had to get that communication out. And I knew there were a few things wrong with it, but no, he knew that I was a high performer. He knew that I wanted to bring my best foot forward, and he wanted my communications to be almost just as purposeful and just as clear as they could be. And so I have so much appreciation for that. But it was little. You talk about trying to identify that up level when you're a high performer already, and those little things matter. And so my communications are much clearer and much cleaner, and spelling error free generally, because I've always got him playing in my brain of what could I do better here. And so I do appreciate that. But even in those small ways of, let me give you feedback just on this email communication or on this flyer you created, that's important. That matters. And we crave that.
Especially when in our company, we're a greatness company, or like we put ourselves out there as a company that helps healthcare organizations grow and improve and go from good to great, great to even greater. And so if you put yourself out there as a greatness company or a hospital that's on a journey to greatness, and leaders and employees are growing and developing to always get better, no matter where you're at, you can always grow and develop and go higher, then that feedback becomes even more important on the little things, right? And sometimes that's all that's left. It's like high reliability in healthcare, right? So once your quality and service get to that top level, there is still work to do. We're never done. We don't declare victory too soon on our quality and our safety and our service excellence and our culture. So why would we give up and just declare victory too soon on our individuals when there are still opportunities? And it's not about being nitpicky or perfectionistic. It's just about that spirit of growth and development and helping each other in that growth and development.
Yes. And I do believe very strongly in that old adage that perfection is an illusion. We always have to have continuous improvement in mind. And so your high performers, when they come to you and they say, can you give me feedback on this? They're genuinely seeking feedback. They're not seeking reaffirmation that, nope, it was great. They're genuinely seeking feedback, and they'll have a better relationship with their leaders and mentors who are willing to give them that feedback.
In my hospital where I was an executive, you mentioned your relationship and coaching from your CEO, and you were a vice president. But in particular, I just can't thank the CEOs enough that I worked with that were so good at giving me feedback, and others on our team as well. But I personally and professionally appreciated that. And in particular, at our hospital one time, this was a long time ago, but I had a CEO where we had adopted Quint Studer's high, middle, low conversations as part of our feedback systems, our formal feedback systems. we study adjusted to them and made them ours, made them better. And then even at Capstone, we've created our own formal feedback system of mid-year conversations and a different approach to that. But that different approach really was the fact that when it comes to high performers on our team, the model there was to only give praise in those high performer conversations and not really focus on opportunities to improve. And in our organization at first, we started with the senior leaders where no senior leader could get a high performance conversation from the CEO ever. Like it was just like a rule that we made in our process that our CEO had to commit to seeking what was that next opportunity for every member of his senior leadership team, where he would commit to recognizing what that next area of growth was. He would coach on that. He would commit to helping us with that. And boy, I mean, if we didn't have that approach and he didn't believe in that approach and he didn't follow through that with that approach, I'm certain that who I am as a leader today would not be the same person. Like, I just honor that so much.
Absolutely. And I think that is such a beautiful approach because it requires that he get creative in how he's looking at everything you've done over the last year, and that he bring that forward as an opportunity to have a conversation with, what are your ideas for how you can elevate this practice? Here's what I see. Let's talk about that together. I always laugh when I'm training really are, when you think of high performers, when I'm training them, because early on in my career, and this is such a small thing, I wasn't performing surgery, but this was such a small thing that sticks with me today. My very first assignment as an administrative professional 20 years ago was to relabel all of the file cabinets in the file room upstairs. And they were minutes. And I put labels on those cabinets that said minuets. Now, my leader could have just gone through and redone that, and I would have never known that happened. And it's one of those things where she sat me down, we had a conversation, I went back and I redid it, and it seems so small, but I still have that conversation in my brain today because she knew that I had a bigger vision for my career. She knew that I wanted to grow and that I could do better. And so it was really, it sticks in my brain to this day, kind of as I chuckle about it now, but so appreciative for every leader I've had in my healthcare career that was willing to pull me aside and say, I know you want to do great work. Here's the next thing that you could work on to elevate your role in the organization. So it's coming from such a small thing that didn't impact patients or other employees, but it was a growth opportunity. So,
yeah. We love the work of Kim Scott and her work with Radical Candor. And one of the things that she mentions is how much we can benefit from those small little conversations walking in the hall in between meetings, right? Where somebody's willing to use that moment to provide some valuable feedback about what might have just happened in that meeting room or something that they noticed, and how those can become really beneficial support mechanisms for our growth is just to maximize those moments when we have somebody's time.
Absolutely. Well, and I think it comes down to this vulnerability-based trust that Patrick Lencioni talks about in his book, Five Dysfunctions of Teams. If my leader's willing to come to me and have a conversation and care enough to help me grow, I feel safer going to my leader when things don't go as we planned. When I tried something, it didn't work. And now I'm going to go to my leader because he or she is willing to coach and mentor me, share what happened, and together we'll figure it out. And so really that's where all of this feeds into trust, and the strength of the team is that relationship we're building together to be able to have those candid conversations.
Yeah, we were talking about this the other day too, and maybe I don't do the story justice in a short amount of time, but we were talking about concept that we learned from another public speaker that she called, panty lines. And basically it was a story of her being, a speaker on a big stage and looking at the evaluations and seeing one comment that said the speaker had panty lines, right? And she went on a year-long mission to find the perfect panties to not have panty lines, when she was presenting in front of a group. And so, her story really was about sometimes we really don't have to take one comment like that one and spend a whole year trying to fix our panty lines, right? Like that really wasn't, we got to pick our battles. We have to pick our improvement opportunities and those kind of things. So I think also part of the point here about mentoring high performers is if we get safe and they get comfortable with lots of feedback coming at them, they probably have the maturity to know, yeah, that's a pearl that I'm going to take in and I'm going to try to do something about that. Where other things are like, they could have that feedback for me and that perception about me, but that's just not where I'm going to put my time and attention. And that takes some maturity too from high performers, is to know if people start getting really willing, my employees, my peers, my boss, others giving me feedback, and I'm open to it, so I'm getting more of it, that I then have to triage it.
Right. And know what to do with it, because the feedback may just be their preferred way of doing something. I would always, when I would hand something off and it was going to a team member that I knew was a high performing team member, I would always let them know what's required of this process. What do the regs say are required? And then I'd let them know how I've been doing it, but make it your own. And then I would help to coach them if they wanted feedback on any tweaks they've made. But really, it was coaching in that here's some opportunities I see, but leaving them the autonomy to say, yep, that's a great one. I'm going to implement it, or that wouldn't work real well in my workflow, so I'm going to pass on that suggestion. And so that does take a very mature approach and self-awareness, but it all comes back to how we're receiving feedback as well. So if we're going to request feedback, or if we're in any role, growing in our role, we're going to get feedback. So our ability to receive it with grace and absorb it and figure out what to do with it, we own that. And we have to take accountability if we want to keep getting feedback.
Yeah, really give it in such a caring way and out of the spirit of caring for someone else's growth and development, but then also receiving it with a lot of grace and appreciation that someone's willing to give you feedback. And so I was thinking too about the fact that a lot of times our bosses' feedback is kind of prioritized, or when we're triaging, like, oh, consider the source, right? And if it's your boss, you're like, oh boy, yeah, I better consider the source. But I think when you're a leader, I think possibly your most important source or your highest priority source is actually your people, your employees that you lead. Like, I think if they say to me, if it's my employee that says to me, hey, boss, you could do this better, differently, that's something maybe to really ponder as a priority.
Absolutely. I think of my early days as an executive, and I thought I was really great at communication. And I had all of my directors together in a room, and we were developing expectations on both sides, my expectations of them, their expectations of me. And one of the things they asked that they felt would strengthen the communication practices in the organization was more timely responses to email communications. And so I took that feedback as an opportunity to level up my communication, and I committed to a 48-hour response time when I was in the office. So was my communication effective? It was effective, but could it be better? Yes. And they helped me identify how it could be better, and we committed to that as a division. And so really taking that feedback as a gift. I always say that feedback is a gift. And I love the panty line story. That always rings in my head. But I always say that feedback is a gift. And what can we extract from it to grow and to do better?
This actually applies too to things like employee surveys, comments that we see there, patient surveys and comments we see there, rounding with patients and the feedback we get there about improvements we can make, rounding with employees and asking how can we improve as leaders. So there's just so many feedback mechanisms, and that willingness to accept that and to keep asking for it again as individuals, but also as organizations, no matter how darn good we get.
Exactly. Well, and with the feedback, what I loved, one of the evolutions I watched at our organization was our provider group take an interest in, we want to take this feedback we're getting and start doing case studies at our quarterly active medical staff meetings where the providers most closely involved in the case would bring it forward. They'd talk about it. They'd get feedback on what others thought they could do differently or better. What a mature spot to be. What a growth oriented mindset. It was just one of those things. The very first one led kind of gave me goosebumps because watching this evolution unfold from a very report focused approach to we got this feedback. I'm going to own this feedback and we're going to learn together on it. It was just a beautiful thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So is there any other examples? You gave a great one there about the speaking, but I know you've been on site with some partners lately and have been doing some coaching and some work with leaders, for senior leaders, steering teams and the like. I'm just wondering if there's any examples that came out of some of that recent work on site with healthcare organizations.
You bet. And so one of the things I want to preface this with is that mindset that we oftentimes spend a lot of our energy in the camp of, I hate calling it the squeaky wheel because we overuse that phrase, but we often spend a lot of our time in behavioral based conversations and we get ourselves psyched up because those can be very difficult to muster the will and master the skill to address. And so I want us to shift our mindset over to this camp of coaching team members who are very interested in growing, who are asking for this, who are your high performers. And so a lot of what I've seen in my coaching work recently has been, I love spending time with the journey teams, the innovative journey teams at our organizations, because when I look into the eyes of their leads, they are sincerely asking me, how can we do things better here? What are your ideas for how I can grow? What are your ideas for how this team can grow? And many times they will come up to me after the meeting to have a one-on-one conversation about what I experienced from that limited interaction with their team in that moment and just some nuggets I can give them to elevate their practices as their team. One of the most common things that I offer to our teams is this mindset that as the leader, you are there to reinforce the vision, to make sure that there's direction for the team, but it's not all on your shoulders to make sure the work is all done to get there. And so being that inspirational coach for your team and making sure that the activities of your team are distributed amongst everybody, that's how you get ownership. That's how you get buy-in. So that's been a lot of the coaching I've done recently, just as that reinforcement that as a leader, you are providing the direction. You are providing the vision. You're not necessarily providing the how. You're bringing to them, helping them to stay connected to the why, just as Simon Sinek puts it, but they're helping to determine the how and the what. And so that's really a focus I've taken in a lot of my coaching conversations with these leads that are great partner organizations. And it's really resonated well.
Speaking of high performers, it's usually high performing frontline leaders that are tapped on the shoulder to help with leading teams like this. So just by way of them being selected in their organization to serve as a leader of an employee driven team that's aligned with a key strategic priority in the organization, like top ranking award-winning patient experience or a amazing workplace culture. If you're a team leader for that, you've probably been considered to be pretty high performing and somebody who's willing to grow and develop and contribute. So the fact that not only do they get the support of the steering team, the support of the boss they work for, but now they get the outside help of a coach like you, Courtney. So it's really an amazing opportunity they have to serve in this role just through the work, they're going to grow. But with the support of doing that work, including our coaching support, they really do have an opportunity to receive that feedback from even that outsider perspective, such as yours. What a
Absolutely.
gift to them.
Right. And you receive it differently. You hear it differently. It may be something that you've heard before, but when you're getting different ideas and different solutions, I think back to my time at my organization when we were partnered with Capstone and you and your partner, Sue, would come in. I would just crave picking your brain over how we could do things better, how we could grow, how I could grow. And so being able to be that resource for our partners is such a gift. And the theme here seems to be relationships in this podcast, because honestly,
Mm.
I am so appreciative of the trust they're instilling in me to take that feedback and to apply it. And then we build that connection. And it's such a special connection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Relationships are so important to this trust factor of giving and receiving feedback. When we teach this, we often pair our teaching of feedback with our teaching of rounding and strengthening building relationships. And they're so synergistic together, right? Because we build that relationship. And as that strengthens, we build our capacity and willingness to give and receive feedback. And so they're paired so beautifully together, is to intentionally build relationships and intentionally seek out opportunities to give and receive feedback. It's really about being intentional versus by default, just once in a while it might happen.
Absolutely. Well, and when you're speaking of rounding, I'd love to give a tip for rounding here. When we first started rounding, I had noticed a theme. So it is about relationship building. It's about getting feedback from our team members. And I noticed a theme that my rounding sessions with my teams were only lasting, 10, 15 minutes. And it was everything's great. And so I shook that up a little bit and I started using the start, stop, continue method to be able to really harvest some great feedback from them. And I wanted at least one thing from each section. So what should I start doing that I'm not doing today that would make your life easier, that would improve the department, the organization? What am I doing that's not quite working that maybe I should stop doing? And what do you love that I do that I should continue doing? And by using this method for a year, it began to establish
Mm-hmm.
that trust foundation of, if you bring me feedback, I'm going to absorb that feedback very humbly. I want the feedback and I'm going to apply it when it makes sense for the department, for my role, for the organization. And so there's ways to ask for feedback if you're not getting any from your staff that are a little creative, that kind of
Mm-hmm.
forces that creativity. So kind of like your CEO who set that bar for himself of, I'm going to identify something for the entire executive team. That's what you're doing with your staff when you're rounding, by just setting it up a little bit differently to extract that key feedback that helps you to grow and the department to grow.
Yeah, that's such a helpful way to incorporate a very specific ask of feedback into rounding. I love that start, stop, continue method. It's more effective than just saying, is there anything I can do as your leader to support you better or to be a better boss or whatever. And, people are so easy, quick, and, able to just say, no, it's great. Keep doing what you're doing. It's all good.
Exactly. Yes. And that's
That's the easy button for both of you.
the button. But then closing
Yeah.
the loop. So you want to make sure that you keep those suggestions front of mind and in front of your team, that you made these suggestions. I heard you. Here's what I'm doing with it. So yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, we maybe can't do everything with everything we hear, especially if we get really engaged in asking for a lot of feedback. It's just like employee surveys or patient surveys. There's always going to be way more things that we see and hear that we could act on. And there's only so much time, energy, and resource for change, whether that's on a personal level or on an organizational level. And so really it's that even if we're not going to do anything with it, you do need to circle back. And that's why I do like rounding stoplight reports to say, wow, these are 10 things I heard in rounding about about my leadership and I'm committing to this one thing right now. And then people know the other 9 you didn't, but you were heard.
Mhm.
You were heard.
And these
Yeah.
are the ones that we can commit to at this time. So yes.
Yeah. 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 This has just been an awesome conversation. So is there any last minute thoughts, comments, suggestions, tips that you want to offer up in our final moments here today, Courtney?
I would just say that the next time one of your great team members comes to you and asks you if they could have done anything better with something, kind of from the heart, remember that they are genuinely asking because they genuinely believe there's always growth opportunity. And the best thing you can do for them is to identify something that could up level it. And it might be a small something, but something, because that's what they're asking for. And so don't miss out on those opportunities to coach and mentor, because it's one of the greatest gifts of leadership, being able to coach that next generation, mentor that next generation in our organizations, and just to watch them grow.
Yeah, that is great advice. And it is a place to just start, right? So thank you so much, Courtney, for bringing your experience, your examples, and your wisdom here to our podcast listeners. And I am certain that there's going to be some takeaways today. So thank you for that gift to our audience. Thank you, Courtney.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure being here again.
Thanks for tuning in to Culture Change RX. If you found value in today's episode and you are a believer in fostering change in healthcare, join us in making a difference. Follow, rate, and review our podcast on your favorite platform. Share it with colleagues and your network. Together, we can make a lasting impact. Until next week, keep inspiring positive change.